Have you ever noticed that all the Logias associated with the Blackbeard pirates are relatively all the same in one aspect or another? Starting with the Captain Blackbeard, also known as Marshal D. Teach, who is the holder of the Darkness fruit. He describes darkness as gravitation that consumes everything. Like most Logias, what he emits is fairly mundane and it has no additional properties. This is true for darkness because he treats it as if it is a weird localized version of a black hole. It is mist that does consume everything. It breaks things down. So in the way he explains it, it's still mundane, so it still makes sense. However, like with most Logias, it is the body of the user that has unique properties. This is no different when it comes to Blackbeard because he has the weakness of taking in everything, which is a holdover from the whole bit about darkness consuming everything. So he can't disperse like a normal Logia. However, he can also negate devil fruit powers from the user upon touch, and presumably when in complete darkness, of which we see in Marineford when the boys put a big cloak over himself and Whitebeard's corpse, he can eat the essence released from a devil fruit user, which we get more explanation about in Dressrosa, and we actually see in Punk Hazard when Smiley dies. So that is why I think too he has multiple devil fruits, because he can consume everything, including the essence released from a devil fruit user upon death. The reason why he's so interestingly similar to the other two is that one, he has to remain solid. This is a characteristic shared by Caribou and Kuzan, because the Bog fruit and the Ice fruit do make the users remain in a solid state. The only difference is that both of them can evade damage, whereas Blackbeard cannot. Caribou is a very interesting case because he, in a way, is the exact opposite of Blackbeard, despite doing the same thing. Because you see, whereas Blackbeard emits a mist that consumes everything, Caribou doesn't seem to emit a lot when he is using his abilities because, well, the mud itself doesn't have the properties of consumption. It is his body that has the properties of consumption, which is why when you see Caribou do anything, he is basically increasing the surface area of his body in order to consume a target. And he does this all the time. You could even say he does this to Drip when he suffocates him. So with that being said, it's very interesting that both of them have the power of consumption. However, whereas Blackbeard emits something in order to consume, Caribou has to increase the surface area of his body to do the same thing. What's also interesting too is that they are opposites in that way, because whatever Blackbeard consumes with his darkness gets crushed, because the nature of darkness is gravitation. However, when Caribou devours something, it remains perfectly preserved, whether that be people, objects, or weapons, because he was able to bring out a full Gatling gun in Fishman Island, and the Gatling gun was pristine. It wasn't jammed up with mud, which I find very interesting. So in that way, that's how they contrast, but they are still very similar to one another. Now, why Kuzan is so interesting in this trifecta is because Kuzan, though more of a standard Logia, was the first weird Logia to be presented in the series, because like I just mentioned, he is solid. He needs to be broken apart in order to regenerate. What's also weird about him is that he's oddly conceptual, like the darkness fruit, because the ice fruit is able to emit ice and instantly still the heat from most things, unless it is resisted by, say, hockey or something of equal temperature to its ability to freeze things. So if it's encountered by, say, the flame fruit user or the mag fruit user, I would think they will be able to combat the freezing potential of the ice fruit. With that being said, the reason why it's oddly conceptual is because ice in its basic state is just the frozen state of water. So being able to create ice is an oddly conceptual thing to do because it doesn't actually make sense in the context of what you think it is. So it's a bit more cerebral than one would think because you're not really making water in order for it to be frozen. You're literally making ice. And in the amount of ice that Kuzan's able to make, it doesn't make sense that he's freezing that much water in the air to make all these different constructs like spears and giant birds and et cetera, et cetera. So his ability in that way is borderline magical, even though the ice itself is fairly mundane, like the darkness that Blackbeard produces. So I find that quite interesting that all three of them are similar in one way or another. Blackbeard and Kuzan are conceptual in their execution, whereas Blackbeard and Caribou do have the properties of consumption. One just uses his own body to consume because it is his body that has the unusual properties to be infinite, whereas with Blackbeard emits a force that is allowed to consume things, but in the process, due to the nature of said force, it crushes everything it consumes. But with that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Works.